I've said before in this class, many women of your generation think that sort of women have full equality, and more or less there's really no more need for much feminist education. But actually, if you look sociologically at women in the workforce, women at home, women in government, in fact there are still real, enduring inequalities that structure the experiences of men and women quite differently. So in sociology, gender inequality is the area in which sociologists try to figure out why this happens. Why is there gender inequality in the workplace, at home, in sexual relations, and what can be done about it? So for much of the discussion today, I'm going to focus on the labor market, since that's sort of the largest part of this literature, and it's something that will directly impact all of the women in this class. Okay, so first, we have to think about how to define gender inequality in the labor market. And there are a few different ways. And this is sort of important because different theories apply to different aspects of gender inequality in the labor market. The first way to think about gender inequality is simply to think about differences in earnings. So as an example, we know that in Canada today, women earn about 73 cents on the dollar compared to men. That's a statistic I've given you before, and I can frame it as a percentage if you like, which is to say that in 2013, certainly 2012, women make, on average, 73% of what men earn, 73%. Now, we can also talk about inequalities in the labor market in terms of vertical occupational segregation, which is that second item. And the third item is horizontal occupational segregation. So I'm going to deal with 2 and 3 in a minute, but let's talk about 1 first, disparities in wages by sex. So here's an interesting figure, ratio of female to male earnings by marital status in Canada between 1976 to 2008. So let's start at the bottom. You see that red line. So that red line represents the ratio of female to male earnings among married women. You can see in 1976, about married women earned about 46% of what men earned. And by 2008, that number had risen a bit to about maybe 66, 67%. Now, among the never married, in 1976, never married women earned maybe about 86% of what men earned. And interestingly enough, in 2008, that number is pretty much the same, might even be a little lower in terms of what women earn who have never been married relative to men. Okay, so talking about gender inequality in terms of earnings is quite simple and straightforward. But there are other ways in which one can talk about gender inequality that are related to earnings, but that give us a slightly different perspective. So right now I'll turn to that second item, which was, and third item, which was vertical and horizontal occupational segregation. Now, in the case of vertical occupational segregation, one has a kind of hierarchical form of stratification. And here, men are typically located in more powerful positions than women, either within a given occupation or within a given corporation. So I've given you a slide here, which gives an example of vertical occupational segregation by sex. These are actually professors at the University of Toronto. The data is from 2006. And if you don't know already, when one becomes a tenure-track professor at any major university in North America, one begins as an assistant professor, then one moves up the rank to associate professor, and and then one moves up the final rank to professor. So there's assistant, associate, and professor. 3 different rankings. Those rankings often take many years to sort of move up from one to the other. And they're usually based, in theory, on merit. So how many articles do you publish? How well do your students like you? Etc. Now you can see here there's a comparison between full-time female and male professors. And what do you find? Well, for one, in absolute terms, there are more male assistant professors, which is sort of the entry-level professor, than female, 354 to 247. As you move progressively up the ranking, from assistant to associate, you find that the difference between male professors and female professors widens, with more male professors achieving associate professor than female professor. As you move up to the highest rank of professor, you see the greatest disparity between male professors and female professors. Here you're looking at a difference of 747 male professors to 196 female professors. So what that tells you is that even in academia, even in a world-class university like the University of Toronto, even today, we still have great disparities between the occupational achievements of women and men. This represents a case of, again, vertical occupational segregation, because you can see as you climb up the hierarchy, sex segregation kicks in more and more, so that at the highest level, you have many more men than women. Okay, let's talk about horizontal occupational segregation. One way to think about horizontal occupational segregation is to look at the category of librarian here. You notice that there are 39 men who are librarians and 101 women. So, approximately 3 times, almost 3 times as many women to men. So horizontal occupational segregation by sex arises when men and women are clustered in different kinds of employment. So for instance, here, women are much more likely to be librarians than men. Women are much more likely to be nurses than men. Men are much more likely to be clustered in manual labor. Now, we call this horizontal if you think about spatially. Vertical is up and down, so you have a kind of hierarchical relationship. Horizontal is lateral, east and west. And in that sense, the idea of the image of horizontal segregation is that men and women are located differently in the occupational spectrum, but that doesn't necessarily mean differences in pay or differences in prestige or differences in status. Rather, the idea is simply that men and women are clustered in different kinds of professions. However, even though we call that horizontal occupational segregation, nevertheless, usually gendered clusters are associated with differences in prestige and pay. So female-dominated occupations like nursing or primary school teaching or librarianship, those female-dominated occupations are typically less prestigious and less financially lucrative than male-dominated occupations. Oh, we've got a couple sleepers here already, I see. All right. Professional sports are a great example of horizontal occupational sex segregation. So think about it. Think about the enormous prestige and earnings of professional male athletes in the National Hockey League or the National Football League. Know that there really is no equivalent in terms of pay and prestige for women. So by contrast, female athletes, professional female athletes who work just as hard, even when they play the same sports as men, like basketball, typically make less than male athletes, and they usually enjoy much less prestige. Okay. So before I go into further detail about horizontal and vertical occupational segregation, there are two short films that I'm going to show you to sort of place this topic in historical context. And in that sense, I'm backing up a little bit, and we're going to take a wide-angle view, looking at the relationship of women to the economy in the past. So I'm going to show you a first short film about Rosie the Riveter. Don't know if you've heard of Rosie the Riveter, but Rosie the Riveter was an icon of strong working women in World War II. Most of your grandparents would certainly know who Rosie the Riveter was if they were in North America. So at the time, in the World War II era, the society needed women to come out of the domestic sphere, to come out of the family and the private home, to enter into the workforce, to support the work effort. But at the end of World War II, despite the terrific work of many of those women and the skills that they learned while entering the workforce, they were largely replaced by men who were returning home from war or had moved out of a war industry. And so women, in large measure, retreated back into domestic life, being a mother and a wife. So that's the first short film I'm going to show you. The second short film is a bit more humorous, and it's a training video from the 1950s for aspiring airline stewardesses. So let's see if we can bring this up.